My name is Harper Reynolds, and I am 28 years old. If there is one place in this world that has always felt like mine, it's the Vineyard cottage my mother left me. Nestled in the rolling hills of Napa Valley, surrounded by rows of vines that stretch toward the horizon like green rivers, the cottage is more than a house. It's a memory carved into wood and stone, a promise wrapped in sun-warmed earth. I can still see my mother, Ava, standing barefoot on the back porch with a glass of wine in her hand, her long chestnut hair blowing in the evening breeze as she told me stories about when she was my age. She had a way of making ordinary moments glow. A picnic under the oak tree became a feast worthy of a queen. Picking grapes turned into an adventure, our purple-stained fingers evidence of our mischief. When she laughed, it carried across the vineyard like music. The cottage itself was simple, 2 stories, white-painted wood with blue shutters, and ivy crawling stubbornly up one side. The kitchen always smelled faintly of rosemary and garlic because she loved cooking big meals, even when it was just the 2 of us. Upstairs was her studio, where she painted, mostly landscapes of the valley, though sometimes she captured me sitting on the porch swing or chasing after the neighbor's dog. Those canvases are still there, stacked against the wall, dust gathering in the corners where her hands will never touch them again. She was diagnosed with cancer when I was 12. Stage 4 ovarian, the kind of words you don't really understand until you see the toll they take. She fought as fiercely as the wildflowers that push through cracks in stone, but within a year she was gone. The last clear conversation we had was in that very cottage. I was sitting cross-legged on the floor of her studio, and she was in the rocking chair by the window, her voice thin but steady. "Harper," she whispered, using the soft tone that always made me feel safe. "This house will be yours one day. Don't ever let it go. It's more than a building, it's where our roots are. Promise me." I promised. With tears streaming down my face, I promised I would never let it slip away. 3 days later, she was gone. Everything changed after that. My father, once a warm and steady presence, threw himself into work as a way to survive his grief. He was an accountant with a relentless schedule, but back then, he still carved out time for us. After Mom's death, he stopped. He came home late, spoke little, and when he did, his words seemed to be half-meant, as though he wasn't really there. I spent that year teaching myself how to cook pasta from YouTube videos, how to do laundry, and how to get myself to school on time because no one else was paying attention. The Vineyard cottage sat empty. We didn't go back that summer, or the next. It was too painful for him, he said, and I didn't have the power to argue. But even as I tried to grow up quickly, I carried the cottage with me. Every time life got too loud or too lonely, I closed my eyes and imagined walking barefoot through the rows of vines, the smell of earth and grapes surrounding me, my mother's laughter echoing through the hills. By the time I turned 16, my father had been remarried for nearly 2 years. Charlene. Blonde, younger, polished. She worked at his office and seemed to step effortlessly into his life in a way that made me feel like a guest in my own home. She wasn't cruel in the way you read about in fairy tales, but her indifference cut just as sharply. She told me once, with a shrug, "You don't need me to be a mom, you're practically grown." It was the truth, but the truth stung. Charlene came with 2 boys, Dylan, 17, and Trevor, 15. Dylan ignored me unless he needed something, while Trevor seemed to relish making me feel out of place. My father, blinded by the hope of creating a new family, overlooked everything. When I tried to tell him how I felt, he waved it away. "Charlene's trying. The boys just need time." But time never changed anything. The cottage, though, it remained mine, even if I couldn't live there yet. My grandfather on my mother's side kept it maintained, and every few years, when I was old enough to drive, I'd sneak away for weekends, sleeping in the bed that still smelled faintly of lavender and flipping through my mother's old sketchbooks. It wasn't just about nostalgia. It was about keeping a promise, about holding on to the only piece of her that felt untouchable. When I turned 25, the cottage became legally mine, just as her will had said. Charlene, of course, suggested selling it. The land alone is worth millions. You could buy a condo in the city, something practical. But I refused. It wasn't about money. It was about roots, memory, and the vow I'd made. Now, at 28, I keep the Vineyard house as both sanctuary and reminder. I go there whenever the world feels too sharp, restoring small pieces at a time, repainting shutters, scrubbing dust from the wood beams, polishing the floors my mother once danced across barefoot. It is mine, and it always will be. But promises are tested. And sometimes, even the strongest roots have to fight to stay in the ground. I was 14 when my father introduced me to Charlene. We were sitting at a booth in an Italian restaurant, one of the ones with red checkered tablecloths and dim lighting. I thought it was just going to be the two of us, which was rare enough that I was almost excited. But when we arrived, there she was already sitting at the table, her manicured hands folded neatly on her lap, her blonde hair catching the glow of the candles. "Harper," Dad said, his voice unnaturally bright. "This is Charlene. She works with me at the firm." I remember looking at her and instantly knowing something in my life was about to shift. She smiled, but it didn't quite reach her eyes. "So nice to finally meet you," she said in a tone that was polite, practiced. 3 months later, they were married in a courthouse ceremony. No big wedding, no family gathering. Just the three of us, plus Charlene's sons, Dylan and Trevor. I stood awkwardly in a dress I had bought at a department store with my babysitting money, wondering how everything had changed so fast. From the start, Charlene set the tone. "You don't need me to be a mother," she told me. "You're practically grown. I'll be more like a friend." But she wasn't a friend. Not even close. She was polite when my father was in the room, but as soon as his back was turned, her indifference washed over me like cold water. She had no interest in who I was, what I liked, or the memories I carried of my mother. The boys were worse. Dylan, the older one, treated me like a ghost unless he needed something, a ride, help with homework, money he didn't plan on paying back. Trevor, 2 years younger, was more active in his dislike. He'd knock over my things, accidentally, make cutting comments about how I wasn't really family, and smirk when my father ignored my protests. I tried to tell Dad. I told him about the snide remarks, the way I felt excluded at every turn. But he brushed it off, his eyes tired, his voice heavy. "They just need time, Harper. And Charlene, she's trying. We all need to move forward." Moving forward, it seemed, meant erasing the past. Within 6 months of the wedding, the house looked nothing like the one I grew up in. My mother's paintings vanished from the walls, replaced with glossy, generic art Charlene bought at department stores. Her collection of cookbooks and gardening journals disappeared, donated without a word to me. Even the kitchen was gutted and remodeled in a sterile style my mother would have hated. The only things of hers that remained were locked away in my bedroom, and of course, the Vineyard cottage. We never went there as a family. My father made excuses: too far, too much maintenance, not enough time. I didn't believe him. I knew Charlene had no interest in stepping foot in a house that still carried my mother's presence. That cottage was mine, and mine alone. By 18, I had escaped to college in San Francisco, working part-time jobs to cover expenses that scholarships didn't. I stopped asking my father for help. The silence was easier than rejection. Summers, I carved out at least 2 weeks at the Vineyard, driving up in my old Honda and staying there alone. I cleaned, repaired what I could, sat on the porch at sunset, and whispered my secrets into the wind as if my mother could still hear me. By the time I graduated with a degree in interior design, I had built a life separate from them. Holidays were the only times I saw my father and Charlene. Thanksgiving dinners that felt like walking on eggshells, Christmas mornings where Dylan and Trevor exchanged expensive gifts while I received something impersonal, a gift card, a candle, once even a blender. Our conversations were polite but shallow, nothing more than surface-level pleasantries. The cottage remained the exception. My father managed it as trustee until my 25th birthday, when the deed finally transferred to me. That night, Charlene suggested over dinner that I sell it. "The land is worth a fortune," she said with a tight smile. "You could buy a beautiful condo in the city and still have money left over." "It's not about money," I told her. It's about Mom. She wanted me to keep it. Well, you don't have a family of your own, she said smoothly. Seems like such a waste, sitting empty most of the year. I didn't bother explaining that it was never empty to me. That the walls still echoed with my mother's voice, that every corner held her presence. Some things are beyond price, beyond practicality. Some things are sacred. I learned then that Charlene would never see me as part of her family. To her, I was an inconvenience, a reminder of a woman she could never compete with. And my father, always too eager to keep the peace, never stood in her way. So I learned to stand alone. But even standing alone, I couldn't have predicted how far they would go to push me out, and how much I would need to fight to protect what was mine. By the time I turned 25, I thought I had figured out how to live with the distance between my father's new family and me. I had my own apartment in San Francisco, a career I was building one project at a time, and a circle of friends who felt more like family than the people who shared my last name. I was still close to my mother's side of the family, my grandfather especially, but contact with Dad had dwindled to quick holiday dinners and occasional text messages that always felt obligatory. The Vineyard cottage was what tethered me to something real. Every summer, no matter how busy I was, I carved out at least 2 weeks to be there. I'd scrub the kitchen until it smelled like lemon and vinegar instead of dust, sweep out cobwebs in the rafters, and open all the windows to let the warm valley air rush in. I planted lavender in the garden beds because it was my mother's favorite, and every time I brushed against it, the scent reminded me of her hugs. I didn't just visit, I kept the house alive. The year I turned 25, ownership officially transferred to me, just as my mother's will had promised. My father had acted as trustee until then, paying for taxes and basic upkeep through a fund she had set aside. On my birthday, I received the deed in a crisp envelope, signed and stamped, my name officially printed where hers had once been. It felt surreal holding that piece of paper, as if it were more than legal proof. It was a message from her. A reminder that she trusted me to keep her promise alive. Dad organized a dinner to celebrate. I think he meant well, but it turned into one of the most uncomfortable evenings of my life. We sat around the table in their suburban home, the one Charlene had remodeled until it bore no trace of my childhood. She had even replaced the dining room set with something sleek and modern, all glass and chrome. It looked more like a showroom than a place where people were supposed to gather. Charlene brought out dessert, a cake from a bakery, perfect but impersonal. Now that the cottage is officially yours, she said with her trademark tight smile, you should think about selling it. The land is worth a fortune, Harper. With the money, you could buy yourself a beautiful condo in the city and still have plenty left over. I stared at her, the fork in my hand hovering midair. It's not about money, I said quietly. It was Mom's wish that I keep it. Well, she said, her voice silky, you don't have a family of your own. It seems such a waste, sitting empty most of the year. Her words landed like stones in my chest. I wanted to scream that the cottage wasn't empty, that every wall was filled with my mother's presence, that I had spent years keeping it alive when no one else cared. But I knew better. Explaining myself to Charlene was like talking to a locked door. She wasn't interested in understanding, she was interested in control. My father cleared his throat. She has a point, Harper. It's a lot of responsibility. I looked at him, and for a moment, I thought I saw the man he used to be, the man who used to laugh while helping me chase fireflies, who used to kiss my mother's paint-stained hands after dinner. But then he dropped his eyes, retreating back into the silence that had become his habit. That night, when I finally escaped back to my apartment, I pulled the deed out of my bag and spread it on the kitchen table. My name was there, clear and bold. It was mine. Not Dad's, not Charlene's, not Dylan's or Trevor's. Mine. And for the first time in years, I felt something shift inside me. A quiet kind of power. I poured myself a glass of wine, something from a local vineyard, nothing fancy, and toasted the air. Here's to keeping promises, I whispered. The irony wasn't lost on me that I had built my career helping other people turn their vacation homes into sanctuaries while my own sanctuary sat mostly empty. I specialized in renovations that honored history, people came to me when they wanted to update a space without erasing its soul. It was exactly what I wanted to do for the cottage one day: preserve its bones, modernize what needed modernizing, and keep my mother's spirit alive in every choice. In the meantime, I guarded it. I refused to let anyone push me into selling, no matter how practical it might seem. Practicality had no place in promises. Of course, I had no idea then how quickly that resolve would be tested. How soon I would be forced to stand up, not just for the house, but for myself. Because keeping a promise is easy when no one challenges it. The real test comes when someone tries to take it from you. And my test was coming. It was early June when my father called to invite me over for dinner. His voice on the phone carried an unusual brightness, almost nervous. "We'd love to see you, Harper," he said. "There's some news I'd like to share." News. The word made my stomach tighten. My father had never been good at casual family gatherings. If he was organizing a dinner, it was because Charlene wanted something, or because he felt guilty about not calling me for months. Still, I agreed. Some part of me always hoped things would be different. When I arrived at their house, I rang the doorbell and waited, clutching the bottle of wine I'd picked up as a gesture of goodwill. Charlene opened the door, smiling in that carefully curated way of hers. "Harper. How nice of you to come." Her voice was syrupy, the kind of sweetness that sticks in your throat. She took the wine and set it aside without comment. Behind her, Dylan and Trevor were already seated at the table, scrolling on their phones, their faces illuminated by blue light. Dad emerged from the kitchen, carrying a platter of roast chicken. His hair had gone completely gray in the past couple of years, and lines etched deep around his eyes. But when he saw me, he lit up, just for a moment. "There's my girl," he said, setting the platter down before giving me a quick hug. For a little while, things almost felt normal. Charlene brought out side dishes while scolding her sons to put their phones away. Dad asked me about my business, and I gave polite answers about the clients I was juggling. We ate, we talked, and for a moment I let myself believe maybe, just maybe, this evening wouldn't end in frustration. Then Dad cleared his throat, setting his fork down. "So, I've decided to take some time off this summer," he announced. "First real extended vacation in years. We're going to spend 3 weeks traveling the Pacific Northwest in July." "That sounds wonderful," I said genuinely. I'd been to Portland for work trips and loved the city. Seattle's great in the summer, and the Oregon coast is gorgeous. "You'll love it." Dad smiled, pleased. "We're planning to stop in Olympic National Park, too." I was actually enjoying the conversation, throwing in suggestions of places I'd visited. For once, it felt like we were connecting again. Then Dad glanced at me. "Maybe you could join us for part of the trip. Didn't you say you'd been to Portland? You could show us around." Before I could answer, Charlene's smile tightened. "Oh, Daniel," she said with a laugh that scraped against my nerves, "this trip is really just for our family. You know, a chance for us to spend quality time together." The table went silent. My fork froze halfway to my mouth. "Our family. Not including me." Dad frowned. "Harper is family," he said firmly, though he used my given name in a way that felt distant, almost formal. "Of course she is," Charlene said smoothly, her tone patronizing. "But she has her own life now. This trip is about us reconnecting as a core family unit. You, me, and the boys." Dylan smirked. Trevor stared down at his mashed potatoes, pretending to be fascinated by them. "I'm sure Harper understands," Charlene continued, turning to me with mock sympathy. "You're so busy with your business anyway. And 3 weeks is such a long time." Dad looked uncomfortable, but he didn't argue further. His brief moment of protest faded as quickly as it had come. I wanted to throw my napkin on the table, to shout that I was his daughter and that no one, not even Charlene, had the right to erase me from his life. But instead, I forced a smile, careful and controlled. "Of course, I understand," I said, even though the words tasted bitter. It sounds like a wonderful trip for you all. The conversation shifted back to neutral topics, but I was barely present. I declined dessert, citing an early meeting the next morning, and excused myself as soon as politeness allowed. Dad walked me to my car. He hovered, as if he wanted to say something meaningful, but all he managed was, "It was good to see you, Harper." "You too, Dad," I replied, getting in quickly before he could see the tears burning at the corners of my eyes. I made it 3 blocks before I had to pull over, the hurt crashing over me like a wave. It had been years since my mother's death, years since Charlene first stepped into our lives, but somehow the sting of exclusion never dulled. Each time it happened, it reopened the wound. I called my best friend, Maya, as soon as I got home. "They're excluding me from their family vacation," I told her, pacing my apartment. "Charlene actually said it was for real family," to my face. "That woman is toxic," Maya said immediately, her outrage a balm on my raw feelings. "And your dad just let her say that?" "You know how he is," I said bitterly. 1 week protest and then silence. "He's been doing it for 15 years. Maya's voice softened. "I'm sorry, Harp. You deserve better than this." We talked for nearly an hour, her unwavering support holding me together. By the time I hung up, I thought I had resolved to put the evening behind me. But 4 days later, scrolling through social media while waiting for takeout, I stumbled across a post from Trevor. A picture of suitcases lined up by the door with the caption, "Getting ready for 3 weeks of vineyard life, fishing, swimming, and chilling at the perfect summer spot." My stomach dropped. The perfect summer spot wasn't some random Airbnb. They were describing my vineyard cottage. For a long moment, I just stared at Trevor's post, reading the caption over and over, my heart pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. Vineyard life. Fishing. Swimming. Chilling at the perfect summer spot. He was talking about my mother's cottage, the very place Charlene had once said was a waste for me to keep. I clicked on Dylan's profile next, my hands trembling. Sure enough, a post from earlier in the week, planning the ultimate summer getaway. Nothing like waking up to endless vineyard views and no neighbors for miles. It was like being slapped in the face. The betrayal cut deeper than anything I'd felt in years. It wasn't just about being excluded from their family vacation, it was about them taking the one place that was mine, the one promise I had sworn to my mother, and treating it as their playground. Without asking. Without even pretending to respect me enough to involve me in the conversation. I dug through my email, desperate for proof that this was some kind of misunderstanding. Sure enough, buried in my personal account, the one I hardly used anymore, was a message from my father, sent 2 weeks earlier. "Just checking, are you planning to use the vineyard house this summer? Is the maintenance company still the same? No request. No respect. Just an assumption." And below that, forwarded to the maintenance company, an email from him requesting a full cleaning and preparation for a family visit, starting July 10th. My father had already made arrangements behind my back. I sank onto the couch, my phone clutched so tightly my knuckles turned white. For a moment, the hurt overwhelmed me, hot tears spilling down my face. But then, beneath the grief, came anger. A slow, simmering anger that hardened into resolve. If they thought they could take my house, the one thing my mother had left me, without even asking, they had another thing coming. The next morning, I drove to my grandfather's retirement community in Santa Rosa. Grandpa Joe had always been my anchor to Mom. At 83, his hair was white and his body slower, but his mind was still sharp as glass. When I told him what had happened, his eyebrows shot up so high they nearly disappeared into his forehead. "They did what?" he thundered, his voice booming across the small living room. "They're planning to use Mom's cottage for their family vacation," I said, my voice shaking. The same vacation Charlene said was for real family only. His face turned red with anger. "That house has been in our family for 3 generations. Your grandmother and I built the original foundation with our own hands. Your mother was born in that front bedroom, for God's sake. And now this woman and her boys think they can just waltz in. He broke off, too furious to finish. Dad enabled it, I whispered. He's the one who contacted the maintenance company. Grandpa Joe's expression softened slightly as he looked at me. Daniel was a good man once. He loved your mother something fierce. But after she died, well, grief can twist people. Still, there's no excuse for this. What should I do? I asked, suddenly feeling like a child again. He leaned forward, gripping my hand with surprising strength. What would Ava do? I smiled weakly, imagining my mother's calm but unshakable resolve. She'd stand her ground, with grace. Exactly. That house is yours, Harper. You don't need to justify protecting it. But you do need to be smart. From there, I called my friend Elise, a real estate attorney. We met for coffee that afternoon, and she confirmed what I already knew: the house was entirely mine. Legally, no one else had any right to use it. Document everything, she advised. Screenshots of their posts, the emails from your dad, all of it. If they try to claim you gave permission, you'll have evidence to the contrary. I nodded. Do you think it'll come to that? Probably not, she said, sipping her latte. But people get weird about property. Especially when there's family involved. By the time I got home that night, I had a plan. I contacted my clients and rearranged my schedule, postponing 2 projects and setting up remote work capabilities for the rest. Then I booked a professional cleaning service for the cottage, followed by appointments with a locksmith and a security company. 3 days later, I was driving north on Highway 29, my car packed with enough supplies for an extended stay. The road wound through vineyards, the summer sun painting the hills gold. I remembered being a little girl in the back seat, my mother singing along to Fleetwood Mac while Dad pointed out landmarks. Back then, the drive had been filled with anticipation. Now, I drove alone, determination coursing through my veins. Was I overreacting? Would this destroy what little relationship I still had with my father? Did that relationship even matter anymore, if he could disrespect me this way? By the time I pulled into the gravel driveway, my doubts quieted. This wasn't just about a vacation home. This was about my mother. About her memory. About me. The cottage looked exactly as I remembered: white paint weathered by the sun, ivy crawling up the siding, the big oak tree stretching its arms wide over the back porch. I unlocked the door and stepped inside, greeted by the faint smell of lemon cleaner from the service I had hired. It was spotless, waiting for me. On the kitchen counter was a note from the Hendersons, the only neighbors within half a mile. Welcome back, Harper. Excited to have you here for the month. Let us know if you need anything. My jaw tightened. They had already been told my family was coming. That night, I walked through every room, touching the walls, the furniture, the bookshelves still stacked with my mother's cookbooks and sketch pads. In her old studio, I found her easel, brushes still lined neatly in jars. I sat down and cried, not from anger this time, but from love. From the deep, aching connection to her that still lived in every corner of this place. By the time the locksmith and security team arrived the next morning, I was ready. The locks were changed, cameras installed. I even called the local sheriff's office to notify them of possible trespassers. Let them come, I thought as I sat on the porch that evening, sipping a glass of wine. This time, I wouldn't be the girl who kept quiet to keep the peace. This time, I would stand my ground. July 10th arrived with a heat that shimmered off the vineyard rows like a warning. By then, I had rehearsed everything I wanted to say. I'd walked through each room of the cottage, placing little pieces of myself, photos of Mom and me, a stack of books I loved, even a vase of lavender from the garden on the dining table. The house wasn't just prepared, it was claimed. That morning, I pulled on jeans and a simple blue blouse, Mom's favorite color. I tied my hair back into a neat ponytail and tried to steady my nerves. Whatever happened, I wanted to face them with dignity, not rage. At 2:15 p.m., my phone buzzed with a motion alert from the security app. I opened it to see two cars crawling up the gravel driveway, Dad's silver Audi in the lead, Charlene's gleaming white SUV right behind. My stomach flipped. I watched on the screen as Dad climbed out first, stretching his back from the drive. He looked older, more tired than I remembered, but also oddly excited. He gazed at the cottage with something like nostalgia, and for a second, my resolve wavered. Then Charlene emerged, checking her reflection in the car window before slipping on oversized sunglasses. Dylan and Trevor tumbled out of the SUV, already on their phones, looking bored and entitled. Dad pulled out a set of keys and walked up to the front door. I held my breath as he tried the lock. The key scraped, caught, and failed. Confusion flickered across his face. "That's odd," I heard him say through the door. "The key isn't working." "Maybe you grabbed the wrong ones," Charlene snapped. "These are the same keys we've always had," Dad muttered, trying again. Then came knocking, light at first, then harder. I stepped into the living room, standing in the center where they would hear me clearly. "Who is it?" I called, my voice calm, though my hands trembled. A pause. Then Dad's voice, uncertain. "Harper? Is that you?" "Yes. It's me." "What are you doing here?" "The lock seems to be stuck." "It's not stuck," I said evenly. "I changed the locks." Silence. Then Charlene's sharp voice. "You what? Why would you do that?" "Because this is my house," I replied, steady now. "And I didn't give anyone permission to use it." I could hear hurried whispers outside, Charlene's voice rising in anger, Dad's dropping low in attempted soothing. Finally, Dad spoke again, his tone placating. "Honey, there must be some misunderstanding. I sent you an email about our plans to use the cottage. Checking on the maintenance isn't the same as asking permission," I shot back. "You assumed. That's not the same thing." "Open the door, Harper," Charlene demanded, her voice sharp as glass. "We've been driving for hours." "I'm sorry," I said coolly, "but I don't let strangers into my house." "Strangers?" Dad's voice cracked. "We're your family." "Really?" I countered. Because at dinner, Charlene made it clear that vacation was for real family only. Her words. Not mine. Through the camera feed, I saw Dylan circle to a side window, cupping his hands to peer inside. When his eyes met mine, shock registered on his face. "She's really in there," he called back. "This is private property," I told him through the glass. "Step away from the window." "You psycho," Trevor spat. "You did this on purpose." "Trevor." Dad barked, his patience snapping. "That's enough." I returned to the door. "Dad, you all need to leave now. There are hotels in town." "Please," Dad begged. "Let's talk about this face to face." But I knew what that meant, Charlene dominating the conversation, Dad nodding along, me getting steamrolled. "No more. We're talking just fine like this," I said firmly. "You excluded me, and then you tried to take the one thing that is undeniably mine. That's not okay." "We'll call the police," Charlene threatened suddenly. "Go ahead," I said. "I already spoke to them. They know I'm the owner. They'll back me up." That shut her up, at least for a moment. Dylan tried next, his voice more measured. "Look, Harper, we've come a long way. At least let us use the bathroom, figure out our next steps." "There's a public restroom at the winery down the road," I said. "And as for next steps? Try the Lakeside Inn. They usually have vacancies." "Harper, please," Dad said, and this time his voice cracked with something raw. "This isn't like you." My chest tightened. He had called me honey moments before, but now it was Harper. Distance in a single word. And when he added softly, Harp, using Mom's old nickname for me, it felt like a knife. "You don't know what I'm like anymore, Dad," I whispered, though my voice stayed strong. You haven't for a long time. Through the app, I watched Charlene storm back to her SUV, slamming the door hard enough to make the frame shake. Dylan and Trevor exchanged glares before trudging back to the driveway. Dad lingered at the door, his hand pressed against it as if he could will me to open it. I don't understand, he said softly. Why are you doing this? Because for 15 years, I answered, I've been treated like an afterthought in your new family. And because this house isn't yours. It's mine. You crossed a line, Dad. Now, please, go. A long silence followed. Then, finally, the sound of retreating footsteps. From the window, I watched as Dad walked back to the car, his shoulders slumped. A minute later, both vehicles backed down the driveway and disappeared. Only then did I let myself sink onto the couch, trembling with adrenaline. My phone buzzed almost immediately, calls, texts, missed notifications stacking up. But I ignored them all. I had done it. I had finally stood up for myself. And even though my hands still shook, my heart felt steady for the first time in years. The night after I turned them away, I barely slept. My phone buzzed non-stop, missed calls from Dad, text messages piling up so quickly I stopped opening them. By midnight, I turned the ringer off and shoved the phone face down on the nightstand. The silence inside the cottage was broken only by the chorus of crickets outside, and even though my body trembled with leftover adrenaline, I felt oddly at peace. For once, I hadn't folded. By morning, though, the war had gone public. I woke to a flood of notifications. Charlene had taken to Facebook, posting a carefully crafted essay about the heartbreak of being rejected by those you try to love and the pain of selfishness that divides families. She never named me directly, but she didn't have to. Everyone who knew us understood the subtext. Comments poured in, most of them sympathetic to her. Stay strong, Charlene. Family can be so ungrateful. Prayers for Daniel must be so hard on him. I scrolled through them, my stomach churning. Then I saw Dylan's post, less subtle, more venomous. Kicked out of the family vineyard house by someone who only cares about herself. Some people will never grow up. Trevor followed with one of his own. Imagine being so bitter you can't even let your family use a house that's been in the family for decades. Toxic. Both tagged me directly. By the end of the day, my business page was flooded with one-star reviews from anonymous accounts, all posted within the same hour. Unprofessional. Rude. Don't waste your money. It was obvious what they were doing, but still, it hit me like a punch to the gut. My business was my livelihood, and they knew it. I called Elise immediately. They're trying to tank my reputation, I said, pacing the cottage as my voice shook. Screenshot everything, she instructed calmly. Timestamps, usernames, the lot. Most platforms will take down revenge reviews, but you'll need proof it's coordinated. So I documented every ugly post, every fake review, every screenshot of Charlene's heartbreak narrative. My fingers ached from the effort, but I wasn't about to let them erase the life I'd built. The hardest part wasn't the posts themselves, it was the flood of messages from extended family and old acquaintances. Some were kind, asking me privately what had really happened. Others were accusatory, repeating Charlene's version of events. How could you do this to your father? Your mother would be ashamed. One message cut deeper than the rest. It came from Aunt Linda, my father's sister. Your mom was one of my closest friends. She'd be devastated to see you treating your father this way. I stared at the words until the screen blurred with tears. Linda had barely spoken to me since Mom's funeral, but suddenly she was an expert on what Mom would have wanted. The only surprise ally came from an unexpected place. My Uncle Peter, Dad's younger brother, called me that Wednesday evening. I just want you to know, he said without preamble, I'm on your side. You are? My voice cracked. Peter had always been polite but distant, someone I assumed kept his opinions to himself. Charlene's been manipulating things for years, he said bluntly. Most of the family doesn't see it, but I do. I've watched how she's sidelined you since day one. Standing your ground was the right move. Fresh tears filled my eyes, but this time they were from relief. Thank you, I whispered. You don't know how much that means right now. Hang in there, kiddo, he said. This storm will pass. The people who matter will understand. His words carried me through the next few days. Still, the onslaught continued. Charlene doubled down on her narrative, painting me as ungrateful and vindictive. Dylan and Trevor posted mocking memes about crazy sisters and selfish daughters. Even Dad texted daily, his tone shifting from pleading to frustrated as the week went on. The boys are disappointed, he wrote one night. They were looking forward to the vineyard. Can't you be reasonable? Reasonable. As if I hadn't been silenced and pushed aside for years. As if defending what was mine made me the problem. By Friday, my nerves were frayed. I avoided town, preferring the solitude of the vineyard, but eventually I ran out of groceries. So I drove into St. Helena and ducked into the small market I'd gone to with Mom as a child. The aisles smelled of coffee beans and ripe peaches, just as they always had. I was halfway through picking out vegetables when I spotted her. Charlene, standing at the checkout with a basket of overpriced organic snacks, her posture stiffening the second her eyes landed on me. For a moment, I considered turning around, abandoning my cart, escaping. But something inside me hardened. This was my town as much as hers, more so, really. Why should I hide? I continued shopping, but when I reached the checkout line, Charlene was waiting near the exit, arms crossed. I hope you're satisfied with yourself, she hissed as I passed. You've ruined our family vacation and broken your father's heart. Several shoppers turned to look. My cheeks burned, but I forced myself to stay calm. I'm not doing this here, Charlene, I said evenly. Of course not, she sneered. You'd rather hide in that cottage and play the victim. Do you have any idea how selfish you're being? The cashier, an older woman I remembered from childhood summers, glanced between us nervously. Everything okay here? She asked. Everything's fine, Mrs. Harmon, I said quickly. Charlene was just leaving. Don't you dare dismiss me, Charlene snapped, her voice rising. After everything Daniel has done for you. I lost my patience. What exactly has he done for me, Charlene? Besides marry someone who never once treated me like family? Besides stay silent while you pushed me aside at every turn? The store had gone quiet, every pair of eyes on us. Charlene's face flushed red. He gave you everything, and this is how you repay him, by embarrassing us, by acting like a spoiled child? Before I could respond, the manager appeared, frowning. Ladies, I'm going to have to ask you to take this outside. I'll come back later, I said calmly, setting my basket down. But Charlene grabbed my arm. You don't get to walk away from this. I stared pointedly at her hand until she dropped it. This is exactly the problem. You think you're entitled to whatever you want, including my house. But you're not. Now leave me alone. The manager stepped forward, his expression firm. That's enough, Mrs. Reynolds. Time to go. With a furious huff, Charlene stormed out, the bell above the door clattering in her wake. Mrs. Harmon gave me a reassuring smile as she rang me up. Don't you worry, Harper. Everyone around here remembers your mom. We know whose house that is. Her words warmed me more than she knew. Because in that moment, I realized something important. I wasn't as alone as Charlene wanted me to believe. And if she thought public humiliation would make me back down, she was in for a surprise. 2 mornings after the grocery store incident, I was sipping coffee on the porch when a car I didn't recognize turned into the driveway. My stomach clenched, expecting another ambush. But when the driver's door opened, I froze. It wasn't Charlene. It was my grandmother Eleanor, my father's mother. I hadn't seen her in over 2 years. At 87, she rarely traveled, preferring the comfort of her assisted living community in Connecticut. Yet here she was, stepping carefully out of the car with the help of a young driver. She wore a pale blue dress, her silver hair perfectly styled, her back still straight as ever. "Grandma?" I hurried down the steps, heart pounding. "Harper, dear," she said, opening her arms. Her voice wavered with age but carried the same authority I remembered from childhood. I hugged her gently, inhaling her familiar lavender perfume. "What are you doing here?" I asked, pulling back in surprise. "I heard there was some family drama," she said matter-of-factly. "And I decided it was high time I saw this famous vineyard cottage for myself." The driver retrieved her small suitcase. "Mrs. Reynolds has arranged for me to return on Wednesday," he explained before heading off. I helped Grandma inside, settling her in the guest room that used to be mine during childhood summers. She moved slowly, but her hands were steady as she unpacked her belongings, lining up her toiletries with meticulous care. "This is a lovely home," she remarked, glancing around with approval. "I can see why you fought to protect it." "You know about that?" I asked hesitantly. "My dear, I may be old, but I'm not blind. Daniel called me in tears after you locked them out, and Charlene's been airing her grievances all over that blasted Facebook." I had to hear the other side. I winced. "I'm sorry you got dragged into this." "Don't be," she said firmly, lowering herself onto the bed. "If anything, I should apologize. I should have intervened years ago. I've watched how Charlene talks to you. I've watched how your father avoids conflict instead of standing up for you. I told myself it wasn't my place. That was a mistake." Her words stunned me. I had always assumed she approved of Charlene, or at least tolerated her without question. Hearing otherwise cracked something open inside me. We spent the afternoon on the porch, the vineyard stretching before us in neat green rows. Grandma shared stories I'd never heard, how my mother had once taught her to send emails so they could stay in touch, how she handmade Christmas ornaments for every relative each year, how she'd stood her ground when Grandma herself had once been critical of her choices. "Your mother had steel beneath all that gentleness," Grandma said with a small smile. "You've inherited that, Harper. You may not see it yet, but I do." Tears stung my eyes. I had wanted so badly for someone from my father's side to acknowledge what I'd been through, to validate the years of dismissal and exclusion. And now, here was Grandma, doing just that. The next morning, she was buttering toast when the security app chimed, a car pulling into the driveway. My chest tightened when I saw Dad's Audi. "He's alone," Grandma noted calmly, sipping her coffee. "I told him to come without Charlene. Sit with me. We'll handle this together." I wanted to protest, I wasn't ready, but there was no arguing with Eleanor Reynolds. Dad looked shocked when he climbed out of the car and saw his mother sitting beside me on the porch. "Mom? What are you doing here?" "Having coffee with my granddaughter," she replied smoothly. "Come join us, Daniel. There's plenty." He hesitated before sinking into one of the porch chairs. For a while, the three of us sat in silence, the vineyard stretching out in front of us. Finally, he exhaled heavily. "I owe you an apology, Harper. Several, actually." I folded my arms, waiting. "I should have asked before assuming we could use the house," he admitted. "I should have stood up for you when Charlene said that thing about real family. I should have done a lot of things differently." "Yes," I said quietly. "You should have." His eyes dropped. I was afraid. Afraid of losing the new life I built. Afraid of being alone. Charlene makes choices for me when I feel overwhelmed. It seemed easier than fighting. But in doing that, I failed you. Not just once, Grandma cut in sharply. For years. Dad nodded, guilt etched across his face. "I know. And I can't change the past. But I want to do better now, if you'll let me." I didn't answer right away. The old part of me wanted to forgive, to rush back into his arms, to pretend things could return to what they once were. But the stronger part, the part Mom had built in me, held firm. "I'll consider it," I said at last. "But there are going to be boundaries this time. Clear ones. And Charlene doesn't get to dictate them. For once, Dad didn't argue. He just nodded. Grandma reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "That's my girl," she said. And for the first time in years, I believed it. After Grandma left a week later, the cottage felt different. Not emptier, fuller. It was as if her presence, her validation, had opened a window inside me and let the light pour in. For so long, I had clung to the cottage like a lifeboat, desperate not to drown in the weight of what I'd lost. But now, I began to see it as more than a relic of my mother's memory. It was a place for new beginnings. I started with small changes. I painted the shutters a fresh coat of blue, the same shade Mom had once chosen but brighter, sharper. I scrubbed the floors until they gleamed, then rearranged the furniture to make the living room feel less like a museum and more like a home. Upstairs, in Mom's old studio, I unpacked the easel she'd left behind. The canvases stacked against the wall were still there, but instead of covering them, I added my own sketchpad beside them. I wasn't a painter, not really, but I picked up her brushes anyway and tried. My strokes were clumsy, the colors uneven, but there was something freeing about putting myself on the canvas, even in crooked lines. I also reached out to the Hendersons, our neighbors down the road. They came by with a basket of peaches and warm smiles, telling me how happy they were to see the house lived in again. "Your mother used to bring us jars of her homemade jam," Mrs. Henderson said fondly. "It's good to have you carrying the torch." Those words lodged deep in my chest. Carrying the torch. That's what I was doing, not just keeping a promise, but tending a flame that still burned. On weekends, I invited cousins from Mom's side of the family. We cooked big meals, drank wine from nearby vineyards, and laughed late into the night under strings of patio lights I'd hung on the porch. The house, once quiet and heavy, began to hum with life again. I even hosted Maya for a long weekend. She sprawled on the porch swing, sipping Chardonnay, and declared, "This place is magic. You should rent it out for retreats, writers, artists, that kind of thing." "Maybe someday," I said, smiling. "But right now, I just want to keep it for people I love." My business, battered by Charlene's smear campaign, slowly recovered. With Elisa's help, the fake reviews were removed, and supportive clients left glowing ones in their place. One even commissioned me to redesign their vacation home in Sonoma after hearing what had happened. "Anyone who stands up like you did has integrity," the client told me. For the first time in years, I felt like I was steering my own life instead of being dragged along by someone else's decisions. Dad called a few times, careful and measured. Sometimes I answered, sometimes I didn't. We weren't healed, not by a long shot. But at least the conversations were honest. For once, he didn't defend Charlene. He didn't try to gaslight me into believing I'd overreacted. That was enough for now. One evening, I stood in the vineyard with the sun sinking low, painting the rows in amber and gold. I breathed deeply, the scent of grapes and earth filling my lungs. I thought of Mom, of her laughter, of the promise I'd made. "I kept it, Mom," I whispered into the twilight. "I kept us." And for the first time since she died, I didn't feel like I was holding on to ashes. I felt like I was planting something new. A year later, the cottage no longer felt like a place I was defending. It felt like home. That summer, I hosted a gathering to celebrate the anniversary of officially reclaiming the vineyard. The porch was strung with lights, the long wooden table covered with mismatched plates and glasses of wine. Maya was there, of course, along with a few close friends, some cousins from Mom's side, and even Uncle Peter, who drove up from Sacramento. To my surprise, Dad came too, without Charlene. He arrived carrying a bottle of my mother's favorite Merlot, his hands shaking slightly as he handed it to me. "Found it tucked in the cellar," he said. "Thought it belonged here." For the first time in years, I didn't feel the old ache when I looked at him. I still hadn't forgiven him completely, not yet, but I could see he was trying. That mattered more than I expected. We ate, laughed, and told stories late into the night. The vineyard glowed under the string lights, fireflies dancing just beyond the rows. For once, the air wasn't heavy with grief or resentment. It was alive. After everyone left, I stayed on the porch with a glass of wine, my new partner, Eli, beside me. He squeezed my hand gently. "You've built something beautiful here," he said. I looked out at the vineyard, the cottage standing proud and steady against the night. "It's not just me," I whispered. "It's Mom. It's everyone who loved this place." I just kept the promise. Eli kissed my temple, and in that moment, I felt whole. The cottage would always be tied to loss, but now it was also tied to growth, laughter, love. It had become what my mother dreamed of, not just a house, but a sanctuary. And for the first time in my life, I knew that no matter what storms came, I had roots strong enough to hold.